Hello, and on behalf of the Independent Evaluation Department of the Asian Development Bank, a very, very warm welcome to all of you to this webinar where we will be discussing using Geographic Information System for evaluating in context of fragility, conflict, and violence. We are holding this event under the banner of the gLOCAL Evaluation Week. Most of you must already be aware of what this entails. It is this week, which we are in right now. And during this week, the Global Evaluation Initiative, that is GEI, has convened with its partners the series of events which support the exchange of M&E knowledge and experiences as a means to promote evaluation capacity development, support evidence-based decision-making, and strengthen development outcomes. The theme for the 2022 gLOCAL Evaluation Week is Evolve, the evolution of M&E in the 21st century, and that is where we come in. Today, we will be discussing, as I said, use of Geographic Information System for evaluating in context of fragility, conflict, and violence. So before I introduce you to the panelists, and let me assure you, we have a stellar group, and there couldn't be better voices to be heard on this topic. I'll showcase a short video that has been produced by the team, which will set context for today's discussion, and then I'll see you right back.
After COVID-19, the world is unlikely to return to the way it was. Many trends already underway globally are being accelerated by the impact of the pandemic. This is especially true for innovations that reduce human-to-human contact, automate processes, and increase productivity amid social distancing. Geographic Information System, or GIS, is a framework for gathering, managing, analyzing, and visualizing geographically referenced information. The use of GIS for development planning and crisis management is well documented. However, its usefulness as a tool for evaluators had gone relatively unnoticed till recently.
The GIS technology helps promote result orientation by connecting local area and the people with geospatial and socio-economic data, such as CO2 emission, natural disaster, land use, and nighttime light. Nighttime light is used as a proxy of socio-economic activity. Through this, economic growth of the project area can be measured. IED has evaluated impact of more than 30 transport projects with nighttime light. Before, it was very difficult to measure economic impact to the local people living in the project area. The conventional economic analysis measured benefit of transport users, such as travelers and vehicle operators. Now, the GIS analysis can complement the existing economic analysis for more comprehensive assessment. Other key advantages are most data are remotely and retrospectively accessible and free of charge. Results are comparable because data standard and quality are the same across country. Technology is innovation and application is a game changer.
The use of satellite imagery and GIS can be a powerful visual tool to present evaluation findings. However, there are some risks and challenges that need to be managed. First, there is the issue of how appropriate these technologies are for tracking an intervention's outcomes. Spatially based outcomes, such as increases in agricultural productivity, changes in land use, or improvements in road networks, can be readily mapped and interrogated. Socioeconomic outcomes can be a bit more challenging, and depending on the unit of study, care must be taken in how the data is mapped and aggregated to protect individual data privacy rights. Second, there is the issue of spatial resolution. Modern satellites can map to a very fine resolution down to centimeters. However, when we go back into the historical record to examine project conditions, say 15 years ago, the resolution deteriorates to hundreds of meters, which may not be sufficient to track outcomes of interest. And there's also a cost dimension for those higher resolution images. Thirdly, there is the issue of ground truthing, where we need to verify satellite observations through data collected on the ground, whether they are agricultural statistics, beneficiary interviews, or the collection of primary data. And a related issue is the need to establish spatial counterfactual to ensure that any observations can be attributed to the intervention and not due to other external reasons which may be beyond the influence of the project.
In fragile and conflict-affected situations and other hard-to-reach areas, satellite data and geospatial approaches are particularly useful in evaluating interventions. At the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility, such approaches have helped us address the challenges of access as well as safety, which are predominant concerns in such contexts. We've used satellite data to address questions of relevance, as many fragile and conflict-affected situations are also areas with high and significant biodiversity. GIS analysis has helped us establish baselines where such baselines didn't exist before. It's also helped us generate long-term data on sustainability of outcomes in difficult contexts, for example, in the small island developing states in the Pacific Islands. More recently, we've been using GIS data on environmental outcomes alongside other survey data, such as household surveys and health assessments, to actually assess both environmental outcomes as well as the socioeconomic co-benefits of GEF interventions.
Great opportunities exist at the nexus of GIS technology and evaluations. As spatially based data becomes increasingly available in the development arena, the use of GIS and remote sensing technologies offer a huge opportunity to complement traditional evaluation methods and provide new solutions to improve the quality of evaluative findings and recommendations to support better development effectiveness.
And now for the panelists. We have with us today Lauren Kelly. Lauren is the lead evaluation officer at the Independent Evaluation Group, World Bank. With a background in conflict management, she has made significant contributions to evaluations in conflict situations. We have Dr. Anupam Anand, evaluation officer at Global Environment Facility. Anupam uses satellite data, GIS, machine learning, computational social science, field surveys, and other mixed methods to evaluate environmental and developmental projects. And we have Yo Kawano. He's lead computational scientist, GIS and spatial data science at UCLA. At UCLA, he works at the GIS and Visualization Sandbox as a member of the Research Technology Group for the Office of Advanced Research Computing, or OARC. And today's session is going to be moderated by DG IED Manuel Jimenez, and so it's over to you, DG.
Thanks very much, Saleha. And welcome, Lauren, Anupam, Yo. Thank you for joining us in this very important event for gLOCAL. So if we could start, Lauren, we've known each other for some time, and I know that you've been supporting the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group to build evidence and promote learning about effective approaches in fragile, conflict, and violence contexts. From your experience, what are the practical challenges facing evaluations in these contexts, and how can GIS help?
Thanks, Manny, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks for hosting this really important session, and hello to my colleagues. Good evening and good morning. Let me start by saying that the way that I'll approach this question is twofold. I want to expand beyond maybe the idea of GIS as a software, a tool, and really talk about geospatial data more broadly. And I also want to focus maybe on the work we've been doing on applying geospatial data collection analysis in conflict-affected areas or inaccessible areas. And I think that'll tighten my scope and also present more room also for my colleagues to speak more broadly. And the way that I'll answer this question is maybe threefold. I think that it is clear that there are several classes of problems that innovations in geospatial data collection and analysis can solve, including in FCD contexts. But it is also clear that key to the use of geospatial data is the layering of all sorts of GIS and non-GIS data, and that in conflict-affected situations or areas, we need to be cautious and creative about how we obtain and use this data. And now that differs somewhat from more staid environments where data can also be used in many different ways. The first class of the problem I think that we're addressing here is just the ability to detect and describe objects and events faster and at a greater scale than ever before. And we have three ways that we're doing that, right? Through spatial, space-based sensors, through drones, through overhead sensors, and through GPS-enabled sensors. And those are all tools that really have evolved over the last few years. Our colleagues in ADB have talked about the evolution of satellite data, which has been very useful in terms of being able to visualize objects and events. We're also being able now, through different functions, to capture radio frequency and predict environmental change. These are critical new advances in the field that are really helping us because of the way that we need to access this kind of data in inaccessible areas. But we're also using drones more frequently. Drones because they're cheaper and more ubiquitous, and because we can obtain that high resolution and relevant imagery from overhead sensors that maybe we can't get from that expensive or inaccessible satellite data. But in conflict-affected area, that really depends. The ability to run drones, the question as to whether we should be using drones in many situations really has to be considered, because drones are often used for military and other purposes. And so we have to be extremely cautious with that. So that's an opportunity, but a limiting factor. The third area where there's a lot of advances in working both in conflict and also obviously in disaster affected areas is mobility data, right? It's GPS enabled sensors, the measurement of mass population movements that allow evaluations to assess either in real time or further down the pipeline, the strategic relevance of our aid distribution. So that's to IDPs, to refugees, in general, just to understand aid vis-a-vis these mass population movements. Okay, you've watched the kind of work that the international community has been doing in Afghanistan to understand those flows, and more recently in Ukraine, and trying to understand the kind of aid distribution that needs to occur, for example, in places like Poland. However, if you can access that data, so can others. And there's a lot of questions we need to ask, both as an international community and evaluation community, about both the attainment of that data and use of that data, particularly when we put it in the public domain. There's a growing body of evidence, for example, around mobility data. There's congressional regulations that are emerging about, that are limiting the availability of that, as they should, in my view, and the way that that data can do harm. So as we're evolving our work and evolving our approaches to use spatial overhead and GPS-enabled sensory data, we also have to think about the evolving regulations and issues around ethics and harm. And I think that's really critical. I think, two more points. The second class of problem that I think geospatial data really solves for is the ability to somewhat understand context. So access, use, and consequences by being able to access otherwise inaccessible people at greater speed and scale, and at lower costs through mobile applications. Now, when you pair mobile phone surveys with the measurement and mapping of mass population movements, for example, now you can ask some key evaluation questions of otherwise inaccessible populations, allowing you to dip into populations that prior couldn't be reached. So using those geo-targeted mobile phone surveys, for example, to ask key questions about livelihoods, welfare, right of return. We have a very good evaluation done in Mali that really did get to many IDPs and refugees to try to understand why they weren't returning home. That allowed us to understand their preference for services over jobs and other critical things in terms of the policymaking arena there. But the limitation, especially in FCV settings, is that many people do not have access to mobile telephony. And so you're excluding, there's a lot of excluded classes of people here in rural areas, women especially, and women that will give their phone to their husband to answer that survey. So there's a lot of ways that we need to think about in this second class, the way that we are scaling access, but then also how we continue to then potentially exclude certain groups whose voices really matter. I'll end on a third class of problem, which is the, we now have the ability to geolocate and target, and I think Garrett spoke nicely about this in his presentation, our ground truthing. So by going to where that combination of the above tools that I've mentioned, the sensory and using that kind of access that I just spoke about to enable us to understand where there is something to be gained by engaging locally. So our ability to become more precise, to target areas that need more inquiry now is augmented. But this is where the fun begins, because now you're talking about FCV areas. So first, to situate our evaluations in context, we need to obtain a host of non-GIS data, welfare, population, statistical data, political and social analyses. And there are challenges with this in any context. But if you're an FCV environment, data paucity, data integrity is going to be a limiting issue in our goal of utilizing GIS data together with non-GIS data to understand the narrative. There's also, as you know, in all situations, a mismatch of the social, economic, and when you're measuring violence, crime, for example, data that are provided in Excel spreadsheets through different agencies, and boundary data, shapefiles. So the unit of analysis that is used, right, is not always the unit of analysis that is used for the other. So this requires evaluation departments to do a lot of geo-rectifying of data before you even get started. This has costs and time implication. It should be done, it can be done, but I think it has to be factored in. I think Anupam is smiling at me. So let me close my statement. We recently did an evaluation of the Great Green Wall on the independent evaluation group. And we used all these tools. We used satellite imagery, we used a lot of drone footage. We did that to understand land use change over time, to understand land use, current land use, and to understand different patterns of land use. And utilizing those two layers of geo-enabled tools, we were able to pinpoint areas where we thought we would see success or be able to probe why there was success, as well as areas where we thought through the imagery that provided evidence of things like encroachment or other types of misuse of the land, we were able to then probe those areas to ask or to try to understand the explanatory factors why the program didn't work as well. So again, that idea of being able to be more precise to understand what works and what doesn't work through this enabling environment. And without that precision, we wouldn't have been able to spend the time we spent to understand those explanatory factors around what works and what doesn't work in different areas of the country, this vast country that had a lot of investments, but we were able to tease out, in fact, in this case, some of the vulnerability inducing effects of our greening programs, in addition to the success. So in sum, a lot of opportunities, caution and pragmatism around using these tools for many different reasons in fragile and conflict affected areas, but definitely a conversation we need to keep having. Thank you very much, Manny, for having me, and over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Lauren, and really appreciate your laying out very, very well, pretty comprehensively, all the issues that we have to confront in taking advantage of these opportunities and the challenges, which I think will be the subject of some of our conversation. But Anupam, let me turn to you. You're at the Global Environmental Facility, where I'm sure you've been employing some of these techniques as you look at the effects of climate change in other areas. But from your own perspective, can you give us some examples of where GIS has helped in working in FCV situations?
Yeah, thank you for that important question, Manny. And I would also like to thank the Evaluation Office at ADB for hosting us and for the opportunity to discuss this important question. And thanks for that video. It kind of captures multiple dimensions from its usage to the limitations as pointed out by Toshi and Garrett. Also to Lauren, because she kind of gave us a very broad landscape of what it can do and what it cannot do, or what are the challenges in using GIS. And GIS, like any method, is not a silver bullet. We have to understand that it has certain advantages that I'm going to highlight today. But it also works really well together with other methods. and it can complement or sometimes supplement. And many times it could work as a great standalone method or a tool. And also in terms of definition, I want to make it clear that we hear GIS as a system or a suite of software or a data tool, but it has evolved beyond that. Now we refer to it as GIS science. So it's a discipline in itself. And within the discipline, we do discuss all the challenges and ethics and issues of risk and privacy and all that. So it's not just data or a tool or a suite of software. So with that, I will just highlight how GIS has helped us address some very unique challenges that we face in FCV situations, such as the issue with access to the data, the safety and security challenges that is quite common in FCV situation. And there are several advantages of using geospatial science for evaluations in FCV context. And I'm going to highlight a few. This is not an exhaustive list, but I think this will at least help us in our discussion. And at Jeff IU, we have used GIS to help deal with logistical challenges. And this has safety and cost implication. And we know that even mission planning and field work in an FCV situation is very difficult for safety, security, as well as the cost implication out there. Second, it helps deal with methodological challenges, such as lack of baselines and finding the right counterfactuals. For instance, we know that data is scarce in areas of protracted conflict. With GIS, we have created time series and gone back into the time so that we can look at the trend. And there's a recent evaluation that I was involved in on just supporting fragile and conflict affected area. So we looked in Liberia and there was no baseline, but using GIS data, we were able to create this dense time series and were able to look into not only the impact, but also the sustainability, because the project is over, but we could see what happened to the environmental sustainability over time and even beyond the project duration. Also, geospatial methods allow analysis at scale. So it's actually scale agnostic, meaning we can conduct analysis at a project site level or at a national level or even at a global level. So that's one of the other advantage. And we have used GIS or GIS data for these kind of analysis where we needed to answer a question at a global level. The relevance of GEF interventions in protected area. There are GEF protected areas in 167 countries. And with this, we're able to answer the relevance question and also the impact question. At the same time, we have also looked closely at specific GEF sites. And these are around 100 square kilometer or so. So it helps deal with the scale issue. Also, I would say the GIS provides evidence that is replicable and reproducible, and therefore it aids in objectivity and transparency. And this is very important for any work related with data, qualitative data, quantitative data. I think the objectivity is very important, and GIS data or GIS analysis if done well can aid into objectivity and transparency. And these are also being increasingly used for assessing human rights violation and corruption in FCV situation. We can see a lot of analytics coming from Ukraine, for instance, as we talk. And I would also like to highlight here that there's also an unprecedented flow of affordable and widely available spatial data set. And Lauren captured all different streams of data that we are getting from cell phone to satellite data to local sensors. And therefore, there's a growing opportunity for its application. I think Toshi also pointed out that it's very cheap. We have around 3,400 operational satellites taking various measurements at timely intervals. And these do not include the satellites that are launched by the three-letter word agency. Together with the satellite data, we also have a lot of improvement in the analytics. So now there are cloud-based analytical services or tools that can do very fast analysis, very efficient analysis in matter of minutes. That was not possible earlier. We needed bigger infrastructure, servers, or desktop softwares, but now even that is being taken care of, and that has led to a lot of development in this area. And last but not the least on my exhaustive or non-exhaustive list today is the output of GIS analysis makes a really good KM product, and that is very important for our work. We know that a map is worth 1,000 words, and here that's completely true. So because you can see the changes, it's very easy to understand the maps or the visualization, and they tell a very compelling story. So it also helps, and it has helped us tremendously in the knowledge management. So with that, I'll stop here, and happy to highlight any aspect that might be of interest to the panel or to our audience today.
Thanks very much, Anupam. Your list was exhaustive, but in a good way, because as we know, you've really captured the landscape of what there is, especially in trying to solve some really deep problems in FCV settings. Yo, let me turn to you. I mean, you were a true computational scientist. You're the numbers and the analytical person behind all of this. If you could just reflect on some of the practical challenges that both Lauren and Anupam mentioned, but also I understand that you've been applying some of these techniques in some recent disasters, including the Fukushima disaster. And if you could draw on that example, that would be great, I think, for our audience. So over to you, Yo.
Wow, thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the organizers, Saleha and Francois and others. This is a kind of a different venue for me, and I'm kind of really excited to be here. Lauren and Anupam, thanks for your talks. It's very inspiring. I love meeting people who share the passion for GIS and cartography. It's that energy is just contagious. So I'm glad to be here, and glad to learn from you all. I come from a kind of a different perspective. I'm here in LA, at UCLA. I've been here for more than 20 years. I've taught GIS in the departments of urban planning. So I've been a GIS practitioner. I use GIS in my research. And I've been through kind of the whole evolution of GIS technologies over the years. So I kind of understand the spectrum of, proprietary software and open source technologies. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and how GIS is used widely in disaster situations of all kinds. And my research has mostly focused recently on the situation in Fukushima. And many of you know the triple disaster in Fukushima happened in 2011. So it's more than 10 years ago. It's my home country. So I'm very passionate about what happened there. And it was a triple disaster, the big earthquake followed by the tsunami. And then the reason is Fukushima is because of the nuclear power plant that was situated in the coast of Fukushima that exploded and subsequently caused the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people. So that's where my interest lies, is in what I call human error, and what caused so much disruption and trauma in the communities affected by the nuclear catastrophe. And GIS has been a key part of policy and informing the public on things that were happening on the ground. I joined a team of scientists in 2012, and we brought devices, and Lauren talked about the technologies, GPS and satellite imagery. We used all that stuff, collected radiation levels, went inside the evacuation zone, collected millions of data points. This is big data stuff. I know Anupam is into machine learning and AI. We use all that kind of stuff, not me per se. I have colleagues who are really good with computation. I let them handle it. I do more of the data visualization side of things. And all this work informs policy. A lot of the maps that were created in the Fukushima situation also created what I'll call boundering. And by that, I mean, it created boundaries, invisible boundaries, because you don't see them when you're on the ground. But these boundaries marked, or maybe I should say they demarcated areas that were deemed contaminated, or in other words, too dangerous for human habitation. And this kind of maps cause a lot of divisiveness because it divides populations into people who are inside the zone and people who are outside the zone. In essence, it causes harm. It causes emotional trauma and stigma that still exists today. People who were inside the evacuation zone during this kind of catastrophe continue to be stigmatized by being from Fukushima or having this association with radiation. And these types of associations and resulting kind of sentiments from maps can be dangerous. So I want to talk a little bit about what is, we create maps based on data, satellite imagery, big data, radiation levels, and so forth. But I also want to talk about what we don't create, or what is not seen in these maps. And that to me is a lot that is lost in GIS, is this kind of capacity to map human narratives. And I'm not just talking about, the numbers on the maps. We're very good at mapping numbers. How many people died? How many people had to be evacuated? From where to where? But we're not very good at mapping stories. And I think throughout my many years here at UCLA, I've transitioned from being kind of this big data scientist to one that is really interested in the narratives of the people. So in that sense, I think we as GIS practitioners, I think we need to do better in elevating those narratives and those stories, because behind every data point, there's a human story behind that. And that narrative is often lost in GIS and in GIS maps. It's not part of GIS instruction unless you're into the humanities, and it does become part of that narrative. So my kind of plea, maybe in some cases for this, for GIS practitioners, is to include some sort of ethnography and borrow from other fields, anthropology, sociology, from history, thicken our knowledge and thicken our maps with human narratives. I like to call it visual ethnography, spatial ethnography, disaster ethnography. But ethnographic practice needs to be part of GIS. And we need to create these types of platforms that kind of go both ways, that allow us to map our data, that we see from the sky, from satellites, but also we need to map things from the ground up. How to do that is a huge challenge. And we're part of this global community, international community. And I've been an educator for over 20 years. And many of my students have ended up being in the humanitarian world, and I love that. But we need to do better. We need to educate the community, folks on the ground, to create their own maps. There's a group of senior citizens in Fukushima who go around every month and they map their own radiation levels with their own devices. They've educated themselves. They're 70 years old because they don't trust maps that are created by government agencies or humanitarian agencies for that matter. And so they've empowered themselves to create their own maps. So that's my word of the day is empowering the local communities and for them to be able to build their own maps.
Thanks very much, Yo. That's a great insight that I think really complements what Lauren and Anupam mentioned, especially on your plea for the human narrative. Just one quick question to you. I've seen some stuff in which some of the emotions are captured to text analytics, also to technology. And maybe to the extent that people use cell phones and everything to text, I've seen them try to use that for political reasons. Could that be something that could try to capture some of these narratives to complement what might be measured by satellites and other things?
That's such a great question. I started out doing a lot of what we call sentiment analysis through exactly what you're saying, through text-based analysis. There's a whole team that analyzed millions of tweets during the disaster situation and created a whole bunch of analytics, data visualizations, the sentiment of the people during these times. And we published a lot of work. But to be honest, it didn't mean much because Twitter is biased to start with. And Twitter, when I went on the ground and started talking to people, they don't tweet. People in the disaster areas don't tweet. People in IDP camps are not tweeting. So who are these people who we're analyzing and publishing results for? And so I got kind of disengaged with this whole kind of text analysis world, and instead gravitated towards film and interviews and ethnography. And I think film, we started this session with a film. Film really captures sentiments in a different way, emotions and narratives. And I think that's what we need to bring into our practice.
No, thanks very much, Yo. Great point. Laura, let me turn back to you and to Anupam on this whole issue of the perhaps the hidden part of all of this technology is the ethical dimension. I have a son who's gone off some platforms because he's afraid of being tracked, and he's in Washington, D.C. So I can imagine what that must be like when you're talking about really fragile populations. Lauren, do you have any ideas on how we as evaluators might try to take advantage of these platforms and yet really ensure that we're protecting the vulnerable as we gather their data? If you could just quickly have maybe a couple of examples, it'd be great. Now turn to Anupam as well.
Let me build on that question. Let me also build on Yo's plea for more anthropology and ethnography in our work. And I was hoping you'd come to me. I couldn't agree more with Yo's sentiment. And I think you had a beautiful phrase, mapping from the ground up, and I couldn't agree more. So you're mapping down, you're mapping up. In the work that I refer to in our work across the Sahel and many different fragile and conflict-affected areas, I think that we contend that you should and can do ground truthing in these areas. And we can talk about how to do that. But the work that we did included 50 deep dive ethnographic interviews. We spent almost a half day to a full day with different groups and individuals. And we chose those individuals on the basis of their circumstances. And we chose those individuals on the basis of their circumstances as they were affected and identified through the precision that we were able to derive from a lot of our geospatial analysis. And that really enabled us to pull into those persons' stories. And that is one of the reasons why our work made it to the New York Times. So we took all of our evaluation work through those ethnographic interviews and put a human face on it as it deserves. And that's really what really generated a lot of public interest that then was able to then spur a dialogue around the way that we were using the billions of dollars pledged by many countries for this initiative because we put a human face on it. So without that human face, I really do think all of the work we do on geospatial, the mapping, et cetera, lives in a different place. When we put a human face on it, I think it becomes real. In terms of protecting people, I'll just, I'll turn to Anupam, but I'll say one thing. We have made, we've done a great deal to try to aggregate data in ways that when we do map from the bottom up, map from the ground up, we protect identities. That means that you are scrubbing any kind of data that includes geolocations or identifiable markers where persons can be harmed based on our work. I'll give you an example in the Sahel. After we left, there were ISIL groups that were targeting village chiefs, some of which we had met. Not because we were there, but because that was the political dynamics on the ground, okay? We knew that if we raised the profile of any of those folks, we knew that we'd put them in even more harm's way. So indeed, it is very sensitive. So on the one hand, I agree with you, we really need to get a human face to this. On the other hand, Manny, I agree, more of a dialogue around how to protect this data and the security of the individuals. Over to Anupam.
I think this is a very crucial question. And there's a body of work in the GIS community on this topic, but not so much within the evaluation community. We do not have very satisfactory guidelines on how to use GIS while making sure that we follow the principle of do no harm, or do not leave people behind, as you mentioned that, why not use Twitter because it's so unbiased. It's so biased. So we don't want to use Twitter because it's a tool for the elites. But within the evaluation, there's not much, but I would say recently there's been some promising development within the UN system, and several agencies have come up with specific guidelines and toolkits. And I would specifically like to point two of them. One is by the UN Global Pulse. So that is all big data work in the UN, and also the Office of Innovation in UNICEF. So they have come up with a kind of a toolkit, what to look for when you are deploying GIS in any situation. And that talks about data related risk, that talk about privacy, safety, security, ethical considerations, particularly about consent, about making sure that we do not expose the vulnerable community by using GIS. Also, there are legal considerations. Now, Lauren mentioned the use of drone and why it could be challenging or limiting in certain situations, because there's a whole new I would say, world of evolving drone law, and similarly with other satellite data, very high resolution satellite data. So we I think we need to be very careful on how we use it while following the ethical principles. And also, I would like to say that within the GIS community and in our experience, we have seen the best GIS or even the remote sensing work is grounds up. It's not the quintessential bird's eye view. It's actually when you use the ground information together with the satellite data, because most of the time satellites won't tell you why. Actually, on the contrary, I will just give you a quick example. In Uganda, we're conducting an evaluation. We saw that there was an unprecedented forest loss within protected area. Someone who's just familiar with remote sensing could have attributed it to the project, and could have been a really bad example for the impact. But when we spoke with the field botanist there, and she said, oh yeah, those were invasive species. So the first thing we did through this project was to get rid of it. So there are a lot of infrared hearing in remote sensing. So unless it's informed by the ground context, we cannot do good GIS or good remote sensing. And that's what we call humanizing the pixels. So we need to socialize and humanize the pixels for a really good and a comprehensive, holistic study while taking care of all these ethical considerations. So back to you, Nani.
Thanks, Anupam. Humanizing the pixels. I think that'll probably should be tweeted around by people. Look, you've all pointed out that in order to really make sure that we use this technology properly, that we need to ground truth. We need to triangulate, use different techniques. So I'm an economist, and one of the things that people are concerned about evaluations is cost. Especially in FCV settings, it's very costly to send teams out there, not cost in terms of risk to their lives, but also cost in terms of making sure that they're secure and traveling to these places. If we have to do all this other stuff, and one of the justifications for using this technology is to lower cost. Do you think that it is possible to still be more timely and be less costly in using this technology, or is there no low-hanging fruit out there? Or what do you think, Yo?
Yeah, the cost. I believe in long-term healing, so you do have to invest because you don't want to be the practitioner who comes in and out in a matter of days or weeks. To me, the forgotten narratives are sad, right? So situations like what's happened in the States with these gun violence and things like that, they come and then they go and then they're forgotten. We need to do better as practitioners. Again, forgotten narratives are sad. Follow-up is the key ingredient to long-term healing. And I think, Anupam mentioned, longitudinal studies, GIS can't be ephemeral. We need to stick to course, assess recovery, healing, human stories, all through spatial form and through narratives. So that's what I believe.
Thanks, Yo. Lauren, when you present your budget for an evaluation to your colleagues and you build this in, what kind of cost issues do you see?
I'll talk about that, and then I'll also talk about the ethics of using third parties, because I think you also raised the cost of human security, which I think is a critical question. Again, great question. In my remarks, I pointed out that by doing the work ahead of time, I think one of the pieces of work we did in our recent piece of work in the Sahel was to spend more time up front, more time at headquarters, getting the data right. Okay, that wasn't on the ground where costs are higher. And by getting the data right ex ante, by gathering the data vis-a-vis our colleagues in the country office and in the statistical offices and using our maps, we were able to be more precise and pinpoint our field work. So the cost of doing field work can be more rationalized in terms of a scope that's clear about what you're doing when you get there. And I think that's something that we could start to talk about in terms of comparing those costs. The second thing you raised, though, what is the cost of a human life? And now we're talking about FCV contexts. And I think that we all agree that human engagement in these environments should happen when it's critical. We don't put third parties in the way of harm. But we also know there are many contexts in which areas are conflict affected, but where when we work with local agencies who are there anyway, who are delivering services, and our regional and local counterparts that are already there on the ground, we've got conduits into those places that are already collecting data and can support us. Because if there's a service being delivered, someone's delivering it. So it doesn't have to be me, but it does have to be a way of maintaining the safety of our teams, but while also thinking about the criticality of doing that inquiry But I think in many cases, I think the case could be made.
Okay,
Manny.
thanks.
Yeah.
Anupam?
Yeah, I would like to take the question on budget because before COVID, actually, this use of GIS and more innovative method was kind of seen as a kind of boutique project that could have some demonstration effect. But I think after COVID, I think this session is a case in point that we're discussing it more seriously. And for budget, I would say it was seen as an investment into future before COVID. But some of the evaluation offices who were invested in this technology, even as an innovation, they were more resilient to COVID. And in several of our evaluation, we were able to use these methods because we already had the systems in place. We were ahead of the demonstration stage, I would say. It's very well integrated into our evaluations. We know when to use it, when not to use it, and how to use it. It needs infrastructure, human resources as well. And I think Toshi mentioned that the data is free. The data is free, but the cost to analyze the data, we need to have the expertise to interpret the data. We need to have the means and the tools and the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, to be able to analyze it. Sometimes we tend to go to vendors, but unless we work with them, they do not know the language of evaluation. So unless we work with them, it's difficult for us to integrate just any GIS or remote sensing analytics based on what the vendors are providing us. And in certain cases, working with vendors is useful, but then there's less institutional learning because once the evaluation is gone, we didn't know what went into it, what did we learn from there. So the cost depends on your partnership. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel in many cases. You can work with the experts. We have worked with NASA, with the University of Maryland, because they have the data. They have been working with the data for 20, 30 years. And I think you could testify what is the advantage of working with someone and leveraging that partnership. Also, in terms of the choice of tools, whether we are using open source tool or whether we are using the commercial software, what kind of skill is needed? Because sometimes there's a kind of confusion that, okay, all GIS analysis is the same. It is not, because what an analyst can do is very different from what a developer can do. And so we need to decide what we need to get done. And then there are cost implication depending on the scope, the time involved, the expertise involved. So I think with a little bit of creativity around it, the budget can be managed, and that's how we have managed the budget, by taking baby steps. One of the biggest challenge, and this is kind of coming from personal experience, is convincing our management that we want to do or try something new, because innovation comes with a risk, and sometimes there's no reward. But taking the baby steps has been really great, and I can already see that in ADB. I remember our conversation with Garrett, and with the video, I could see the whole evolution of the use of GIS within ADB. So that was very encouraging, having been on that journey and still continuing with that journey. But I think it's very crucial taking the baby steps and then using the demonstration effect to do more and integrate more. So I think that's the way, and being creative is the way to deal with the budgetary constraints, if there are any.
Anupam, great point. I know two things. One is that managers are hard to convince. I know that for a fact, being one myself. But secondly, the point that you brought up on perhaps it's hard enough for us as to try to build evaluation capacity within developing countries to train them on how to do surveys and things. Is there a risk, Lauren, over to you, just very quickly on whether you think, because it's so difficult, perhaps technically, to use GIS and other technologies, that we develop a cadre of evaluation elites who go around selling their services around the world instead of building capacity on the ground.
Opposite, I would say opposite. We were in Niger and we were out in a rural area, using our drones to map land use change. Okay. And my counterparts within the government and the military wanted that drone. They wanted to get their hands on that. And they asked why the World Bank Group didn't train them on this, why they didn't use it for monitoring, why it wasn't in the M&E system, why couldn't they do it? And I said, I don't know why, let's ask. So we went back to the World Bank Group and we said, let's build some of this geospatial tools into our work when we do massive, landscape restoration programs. It should be in the monitoring. Let's do it. So I'm hoping in the future, this becomes a lot more ubiquitous and not so niche at all. Thanks, man.
Oh, great. So over to you quickly, as we're running out of time. How difficult is it for people, especially in developing countries, to be able to use this kind of technology so that we don't have to rely on these international vendors who only?
I'm a huge fan of open source technologies. I've been bitten by proprietary software because they, it doesn't work. We got the wrong version. So I'm a huge fan of using open source technologies. My teaching has completely changed to support these technologies, and it really empowers. I go back to my favorite word, empowers people, communities, local agencies to learn GIS themselves, because they don't have to worry about licensing. They don't have to worry about, having to put a map, the data on a Google map. They can use their own open source data. OpenStreetMaps is available. Python has a coding language, now has geospatial libraries. R, these are all open source technologies that a lot of developing countries and students are learning. And it's up to us as GIS practitioners to kind of educate them, train the trainers, let them know about these geospatial capabilities in open source that are fast approaching what any other proprietary software can do. So that's my pitch as well, to empower the locals with open source technologies.
No, thanks. And I think from you, ending like with the word empowerment is great. Lauren, Anupam, any last words from you on just quickly, one word, one sentence that you think captures what you've been trying to say in this hour? Lauren.
Oh, the sky's the limit, I guess. Thanks for having me.
Very good. Anupam.
Yeah, I would just amplify what Lauren said. Our imagination is our limit. So.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think you have all brought together not just what the wonderful opportunities are for us to learn more about how to assess the impact of interventions in fragile and conflict settings, but also the real challenges that we as a community have to address. So with that, back to you, Saleha.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the panelists as well. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.